Once, in spring, a molting Kermit had broken down the door and devoured everything it could find, down to the last scrap, even the backpacks. But never before had the storage been opened with a cutter. A cutter? Semyonov repeated skeptically, then added, "That's no cutter, colleagues. That's a laser. A military-grade laser in economy mode, running on minimum power." Scotch froze mid-step. Then he slowly turned around. "And what makes you think it's a laser, not, say, some kind of construction-grade impulse cutter?" Semyonov shrugged slightly. "You can tell by the cut. Impulse cutters leave a dashed line. A blowtorch would leave scale and black scorch marks. I don't see either of those. So, laser. And what makes you think it's military grade?" "Because only a military laser, even at minimal power, can pierce this type and thickness of plastic all the way through and leave marks on the far wall of the storage unit. If it weren't set to minimum, well, the cut would look very different." Scotch silently cursed himself. He hadn't even bothered to glance at the far wall. Some detective he was, but then again, he wasn't a detective. He was a guide. A good guide on a good tour. One where no bastards were supposed to be cutting open food depots with military-grade lasers, even if they were set to minimum. And if something like that did happen, it meant trouble, trouble that needed sorting out and the looters punished immediately. This was a nature reserve, after all. Only staff and clients of exotic tour had any right to be here. There was a license, damn it. Valti met Scotch's gaze with a questioning look. It was obvious. The three were traveling light. "The storage is empty," Scotch quietly told his partner. "Open with a laser. Looks like military grade." Valti's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and with good reason. That day, they ate almost nothing but crabs. Fortunately, Solyanka, eager to make up for his mistake, had caught a truly ridiculous number of them. Scotch didn't hide the fact of the robbery from the tourists. No real harm in a little drama. He could easily hunt enough game to feed 12.5 people on his own. This was a reserve. After all, there was wildlife everywhere. And the fact that armed individuals, possibly even aliens, might be roaming nearby with military lasers, well, that wasn't something to hide either. The group needed to stay alert. Still, the impression of the mangrove bay's beauty was somewhat spoiled. Scotch left Mr. Little to watch over the camp, winked to Solyanka to hide, and led the group down to the shore. The tourists immediately grabbed their cameras, eager to capture the pristine scenery. To everyone's surprise, none of the cameras worked. It was as if all their batteries had died simultaneously. They spent a little time trying to catch crabs. Lacking skill, the group's efforts were pitiful. But Valti quietly hauled out some of Solyanka's catch from the bushes while pretending to be crab hunting a bit further away. In the end, everyone was happy. They didn't have to wade through the shallows for too long. Each caught a couple of crabs, and they ended up filling 3 backpacks. The next morning, they broke camp after a light breakfast from the previous day's leftovers. During the hike, Valentina Kilko recalled and told Scotch that 3 days ago, she had seen a bright fireball in the sky, something that should have landed with a big boom. But there had been no sound or seismic aftermath, which led her to believe it wasn't a meteor at all, but a spacecraft, an entry module that had come down at excess velocity. Scotch tried to reconstruct the timeline and location. It looked like the so-called meteor had crashed somewhere in the vicinity of Mangrove Bay. That was troubling. Scotch immediately called for a break and wandered off to radio the rescue team and contact the base. He was becoming more and more convinced. Poachers had infiltrated the reserve. He told the rescue team everything, but the base never responded. Later that evening, Zuberbuller spotted another spacecraft far to the west. And it wasn't some pathetic poacher's shuttle. It was something big, very big. But before they could get a better look, the ship climbed into the sky and vanished into the blue. It might have been a transport from the company. Such a vessel had once landed on what was now the spaceport, the very ship that had brought everything necessary to build the base. But it also might not have been. After sunset, Scotch confirmed it for sure. The radio wasn't working. Just wasn't. The batteries weren't dead. Nothing appeared burned out. and he hadn't dropped it on the rocky ground. That night, Scotch slept poorly. He kept listening. Eventually, he got up and sent a dozing Podolian off to the tent. Just in case. Better to keep watch himself. More reliable that way. Soon Valti crawled out as well, looking gloomier than usual. "Can't sleep," he muttered. "Little, that snake, is probably chugging spirits with the rescue guys again. When we get back, I'll show them," Scotch growled. "I'll even put on the director's uniform for the occasion. They'll get a taste of the good life. Damn it." "Assuming we do get back," Valti said quietly. "I have a feeling we're in for worse before then." Scotch tensed. "What do you mean?" "Just, something feels off. Don't you sense it?" "I do," Scotch admitted. "Since yesterday? Maybe earlier." "Same here." But that night, their listening was in vain. The jungle whispered its usual nocturnal symphony, and the moonlit darkness yielded no threats. The threat came the following afternoon. The guides took turns trying again and again to contact the base or the rescue team. Useless. Silence, they ate breakfast in silence too. No usual jokes from Podolian, no antics from Denis Vorontsov. The gourmet lake crabs wouldn't go down. Tension hung thick in the air. Tourists had long sensed that something was going wrong with their exotic tour. Previous misadventures had been laughed off, but now the mood had turned grim. Even the unflappable shapeshifter, Nutty Nagoody, seemed rattled. Scotch was just beginning to wonder if he should try the dead radio again. Who knows? Maybe it was just interference, some unexplored atmospheric phenomenon of Tabasca jamming the transmissions. What if it had passed? It wasn't one of the guides who spotted them first. It was Semenov. Two figures, stumbling from the wall of forest, one supporting the other, who was clearly limping. Semenov squinted toward the tree lean, and Scotch, catching his gaze, instinctively followed it. About a second later, Scotch sprang to his feet. From a distance, it was hard to make out the battered silhouettes of the two rescue team members, Solyanka and Hidden, but the lead guide of the exotic tour recognized his men. The real shock came only as they drew closer. Their jumpsuits were in tatters, covered in filth. They had no weapons, no gear. Hidden's beard was singed, and he was hobbling badly. Solyanka's face was a mess of bruises down the left side, swollen purple and black. His left arm was clearly injured, and yet he was the one helping Hidden walk. The two of them stumbled toward camp on sheer nerves alone, running on empty. Any moment, they might drop, unconscious, or worst out of course. Everyone rushed to help them hobble the last few meters. Medical kits appeared in eager hands. But the roles had flipped. Now it was the paying tourists crowding around their supposed protectors, offering aid to the half-dead professionals they'd paid to keep them safe here on Tabasca. Scotch watched grimly, then met Valti's eyes. The seasoned tour operator looked shaken, but the glint in his eyes and the muscles twitching along his jawline told Scotch that his partner was just about ready to act off script. So Scotch took the lead and made the call himself. "All right," he barked, voice sharp as a whip. "Everyone listen up. Dennis, a cop, Fausto, Ornella, drop the kits. Ornella will tend to the wounded. You four, move over there, toward the trail. Get down, stay hidden, eyes on both directions. If anything's off, fire a signal shot into the air and fall back to camp. The clip with red stripes, those are the signal rounds. Remember that. Kostya, Valentina, Noogie, you're on river duty. Watch both upstream and down. Same protocol. Patrice, Vlad, you've got the forest edge. Fewer lines of sight, but two of you can cover it. The forest," Semenov said darkly. "We'll be tangled up or dead in minutes. Won't see. Squat. And if your guys got worked over like that," his tone said he'd still go if ordered. Patrice glanced between Scotch and Semenov, pale but determined, awaiting the final word. Smart bastard, thought Scotch. He's right. They won't catch much out there. All right, skip the forest, Scotch muttered, coughing into his fist. He accepted a medkit from Ornella. Set up by the ridge over there. Got it, Semenov replied, grabbing his rifle and standing. Come on, Patrice. The girl followed without hesitation. There was something solid and dependable about Semenov, something women instinctively picked up on, an invisible current of strength that made them cling to men like that with a grip stronger than death. The rest dispersed as ordered. What? About us? Asked the bot couple in unison. They looked both very serious and very lost. You take up position by the food tent, Scotch said, improvising. Eyes on the sky. They could come from above, too. Truth was, he needed the tourists out of the way, just for a few minutes. Just long enough to speak to the rescue team without anyone overhearing. And if he had to scatter them, he figured he might as well do it with a little purpose. Like it or not, this wasn't the bunch of clueless, carefree stragglers that had landed on Tabasco just days ago. The bots, still catching their breath, moved to their post. At last, the guides had the wounded men to themselves. Report, Scotch ordered Solyanka. Of the two, he looked marginally better, if you could ignore the bruises and the busted arm. We were attacked, boss. Where's Span? Dead or captured? We don't know. Didn't see. I thought he was with you. Solyanka spat angrily onto the grass. He took off last night. Before the attack. Who hit you? Soldiers. Aliens. Came up the river in a boat. What boat? Type size. Our boat. Amphispana. Same model the northern fishermen use. Did they speak? No. They started shooting right away. I don't even know how we got away, Chief. But they didn't really chase us. It looked like they were more interested in the bunker near the knotted forest. Damn it, Scotch muttered, beginning to lose his temper. You led them to the bunker? We had to drop off some supplies for you after yesterday. Solyanka replied quietly, then fell silent. After a pause, he added grimly, Poor Zban. Valti, go check if that drunkard LTPTL is in his tent. Maybe he's just passed out. Valti ran off. He returned shortly, shaking his head darkly from side to side. So, he wasn't passed out. Scotch forced himself to shake off the dark thoughts and focus. He began framing his next round of questions. What were they armed with? What race? Light. Beamers, Solyanka replied. Race? Looked like skeletons. Hard to tell. Everyone was in camouflage. So that's why the base isn't responding. Scotch said bitterly. Goddamn pirates. Don't tell me they've taken everyone out. He couldn't bring himself to say what he feared most, that everyone on the base might already be dead. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. Oh, the girls from Dispatch, Reckless Verka, Martina, the guys from the spaceport, everyone. I doubt it's pirates, Scotch, Valti rumbled in his low voice. Pirates are a rabble at best. They usually don't have the tech to pull off a full comms blackout. Blackout? Why do you think our radios died, the wristbands too, and the NAV units? It's not that the base isn't answering. We can't transmit anything. But why are the rifles still working? What do you mean, why? There's no synthesis in them, no net-linked components. You can't get much simpler than a rifle. Hell, even an ice axe would still be useful. You can check if you want. Besides, if it's a military-grade tech block, basic firearms usually aren't affected. A desinter or spin crusher would definitely be fried. But a plasma thrower or one of those old Sactomets still spits fire like nothing's wrong. But comms, even the simplest ones, they're always the first to go. Shit, Scotch cursed. If it's not pirates, then who? Valdi didn't get a chance to answer. Ships. Came Tinter's shrill cry. Ships in the sky. West of here. All eyes turned skyward, toward the blue dome above Tabasco. For ships, flying in a tight diamond formation, streaked across the sky heading toward Mangrove Bay. Each left behind a cottony contrail, clearly visible against the deep blue. They were flying low, barely 500 meters up. Each one looked like a spearhead mounted on a long needle. There, more of them, came a voice from nowhere. Simonov had appeared without warning. He probably hadn't gone anywhere, just listened in from behind a nearby tent. Scotch glanced his way, but didn't even have the energy to be annoyed at his eavesdropping. Over Sarah, another group of 4 ships was passing. At that moment, a loud bang echoed, a signal shot, most likely from tourists or scouts near the river. trying to alert anyone nearby. To the tents. Scotch barked in a voice that didn't sound like his own. He grabbed the groaning hidden and dragged him along. Everyone scrambled for cover. The camo-patterned tents blended well with the surroundings, and Scotch had wisely set up the camp inside a small grove, bordered on all sides by open meadow. "What are you still doing here?" Scotch asked Semyonov harshly. "We have to leave, Vadim," Semyonov said softly. "Trust me." He neatly dodged the question. Scotch decided to press him on it later. Once the alien ships passed overhead, it looked like they would. The formation began to pull away. Then suddenly, the ship closest to the camp dropped sharply toward the ground, and the others started banking into a wide turn. "Damn it," Valdi hissed. "Where are the magazines?" "On my belt," Scotch muttered darkly. Belt mags might not be enough, Scotch quickly checked. For full magazines, 36 rounds each, plus the half-spent one clipped in. What the hell was Valti planning? Meanwhile, the ship hovered just beyond the treeline, pressing a hazy gravlift column into the grass. Shapes began to flicker within it, aliens descending. Strangely, the ship didn't immediately rise again. Instead, it glided a few dozen meters forward and gently settled onto the ground. Softly and nearly silently. Even when it flew, there had only been a dry hiss from its slicing passage through the AI. At least 30 troops were disembarking. Scotch glanced skyward. The other 3 ships were spiraling above the jungle, clearly scanning. "They've got biodetectors." The realization hit Scotch like a punch. They're searching for humans. Probably dropping miniaturized sensors too. The intruders were heading straight for the camp. And yes, they really did resemble skeletons. But ones made of impossibly thick bones. Each rib was as thick as a man's arm. In the bicep. It was impossible to tell. Were they skeletons with oversized bones, or something else entirely? Something with a dozen long, narrow slits running down its torso. "Where's that camouflage, I wonder?" Valti asked with a hint of irony, raising his rifle. The first volley cut down 6 aliens. Everyone fired, even blue-faced Solyanka. Even hidden, pale as an utter blizzard. Even the bots, Tinter and Ganilla, who hadn't so much as flinched. And from the edge of the forest came more fire. Blue sparks flared among the bushes, betraying the presence of plasma suppressors. The skeletons hit the ground immediately. They returned fire only once or twice, then fell silent altogether. Scotch's heart twisted with dread. God forbid someone from the tourist group came charging out of the trees. But thankfully, no one did. "This is bad," Semyonov remarked suddenly. He didn't look even remotely rattled, as if ambushing alien intruders in a nature reserve was just part of his regular weekday routine, weekends excluded. "What do you mean?" Solyanka rasped. "They're not firing back. Means they've been ordered to take us alive. Any moment now they'll trigger some kind of mind scrambler, and we're done. They'll scoop us up like warm mushrooms. We won't even twitch." "What kind of scrambler?" Scotch hissed. He didn't like where this was going. Not one bit. "Psychotropic," Semyonov replied coolly. "You'll be seized by an overwhelming sorrow, a deep mournful grief, and you'll walk straight into their arms." "Willingly." "He's right, Scotch," Valti said grimly. "They used to do that during the war, on drop zones, if they didn't need to clear the area." "What goddamn war?" Scotch yelled, forgetting all caution. "They're poachers." "They're no poachers," Semyonov scoffed. "That's regular Tsar fleet. The ashen skeletons, void troopers. And those 2-inch, he nodded at Hidden and Solyanka, judging by the symptoms, were tampered with by spec ops or drop shock. But the conversation abruptly died. Vorontsov, Podolian, and Fausto RQD came charging out of the woods, firing as they went. They were running straight at the prone shut sirs. "You idiots, what are you doing?" Scotch bellowed, jumping to his feet. "You'll get fried." But the shut sirs didn't fire. They just lay low, shifting and regrouping, clearly preparing for the incoming human charge. "The hell?" Semyonov muttered in confusion, then sprang up too. Unlike Scotch, he didn't hesitate. He bolted forward without grabbing his rifle. Cursing, Scotch sprinted after him. Valty groaned and followed suit. Solianka, gritting his teeth, got to his feet and hobbled after them. Even Tinderbot stood, clutching his gun to his chest and preparing to move, but Ganilla instantly grabbed him by the shirt and yanked him back. Hidden groaned. "Someone hit me with a painkiller, will ya? For cubes. Horse dose, I don't care. I can't shoot, my shoulder's numb." Patrice Duell, just returning from the opposite side of the camp, rushed to help him. Meanwhile, the vanguard of the Schutzers had subdued Vorontsov, Podolian, and Fausto, apparently using standard paralytics. The brave trio had managed to drop a few skeletons, but it offered little comfort. Semyonov barreled ahead like a courier hover ATV on full thrust. He didn't seem to notice the divots, molehills, or bramble-choked ground. Scotch and the others were trailing behind fast. A few skeletons moved to intercept Semyonov, brandishing their paralytics, and the fool hadn't even brought his gun. He should be gunning them down like zebras on a safari, but Semyonov dropped them all without a firearm. In one hand he held a machete, in the other, a slender silver rod about a forearm long. He gripped it by the middle. He cut through the line of Schutzers like a plasma burst through parchment. The skeletons snapped like chocolate bars in multiple places. By the time Solianka finally reached the scene, not a single alien was left standing or breathing. Well, some of them weren't dead yet. Scotch stared in horror at the thick bones cracked and leaking viscous brown fluid, at the shattered skulls and the granular mass swimming in more of that same sludge. A few of the Schutzers were still twitching, but none could fight. Most of the 30-something invaders had been shot. A dozen or so personally dismantled by Semyonov. Those were the worst to look at. As the outcome became clear, Semyonov bent down and picked up some device from the alien arsenal. Not a standard bioparalyzer. Scotch had held those before and started toward the alien landing craft. He didn't make it. The ship lifted off the moment he approached. Semyonov slowed, then stopped, glaring at the sky with thinly veiled irritation. Scotch stared in disbelief as the craft climbed, joined the other three in their spiral, and together the squadron veered off to the southeast, toward the tourist base. "We drove them off," Valty croaked, then fell into a long coughing fit. "Dear God, we drove them off." From the forest came Ornella Arcudi, and from the riverside thicket, Zuberbuller, Valentina Kilko, and the shifter. Semyonov stopped staring at the sky and briskly turned back. As he approached, Scotch straightened up, lungs full of questions. But Semyonov cut him off with a sharp hand gesture, palm out. "Later, Vadim. Explanations can wait. We need to get the hell out before they send reinforcements. Next time it won't be infantry, it'll be spec ops, guaranteed." The words caught in Scotch's throat. He was right. This mystery man with the worn-out name tag and average looks. The exotic tour group had lit up the radar, and good. Scotch watched grimly as Semyonov removed small, orb-like devices from each fallen Schutzer, pulling them off their chests, vacuum-mounted, likely sensors or worse. For some reason, Scotch didn't feel like asking questions anymore. At last, Semyonov finished his looting, straightened up, and gave the guides a pointed look. "Let's move," Scotch ordered obediently, waving his hand. And he thought, funny, who's really in charge here? Never before had the camp been broken down so quickly, and that was despite Vorontsov, Podolian, and Fausto lying paralyzed and completely useless. The rest of the group, however, moved like lightning. They plunged into the jungle at top speed, following a fresh antelope trail toward the watering hole, then veered north along the Syra River. Scotch deliberately led them through areas frequented by large hoofed animals. He hadn't forgotten about the biodetectors. There was something else that gnawed at him. Mr. Little, the errant supply manager, was missing. Scotch couldn't even pinpoint the moment of his disappearance. In truth, there was nothing mysterious about Mr. Little's absence. He had quickly picked up on the guide's growing tension after a series of unfortunate events. Solianka's stunt, The ransacked supply depot, Zuberbuller spotting a suspicious spacecraft in the sky, the busted radio. Solyanka's rampage, if you looked closely, was sparked by none other than Mr. Little, or rather, by Mr. Little's stash of alcohol. A sorry fact that didn't help anyone's mood. That day, after the crab hunting trip to Mangrove Bay, Little looked gloomier than a storm cloud, even though he'd knocked back a solid 150 grams of liquor by morning. If anything, it only made things worse. By evening, things had become unbearable. The guide's tight expressions and the tourist's slowly worsening mood grated on Little's nerves. Quietly, he siphoned some spirit from his pillow stash into a flask. Then, seizing a moment when no one was watching, he slipped into the bushes and headed toward the rescuers' bivouac. They usually camped no more than a kilometer or two from the group. Little might not have been a seasoned tracker, but he had studied Scotch and Valtie's standard route pretty well. He even knew their usual camping spots. So, despite the dark, he reached the rescuers' fire, shielded by a fireproof dome. Without much trouble, he walked up silently, sat down silently, and silently poured drinks into camp mugs. The rescuers drank in silence. They weren't exactly thrilled with recent events either. Their evening talk with Scotch hadn't clarified much. There didn't seem to be a compelling reason to abort the tour, but carrying on felt like a mistake too big to justify. Over the course of a local 100-minute hour, barely 15 words were spoken. When the spirit ran out, the recently disciplined Solyanka impulsively pulled out a bottle of Sedentinian sherry. That final polish, as it turned out, was Mr. Little's undoing. He remembered drinking, but how he made his way back to camp was a complete blank. The rescuers, leaving Zban on watch, had passed out. Little managed about 300 meters toward camp before collapsing into a petunia bush and snoring like a log. Fate was on his side. Just before dawn, a mature wyvern, a local predator, one of the most dangerous, passed nearby. Imagine a marten the size of a leopard. As the saying goes, fortune favors fools and drunks. The wyvern hadn't fully digested its night hunt yet and was just looking for a place to rest. It sniffed Little's boot, then his hand, caught a whiff of alcohol, snorted in disgust, circled the bush once more, and moved on. Little never even stirred. Solyanka and Hidden were also in no rush to get up, at least not until the sun had pierced even the thick jungle canopy. Zban nudged them awake and then collapsed to sleep himself. Hidden took a quick perimeter check, just in case, while Solyanka went for watered. That's when the Shatser commandos struck. Zban was shot in his sleep, hit in the shoulder. He jerked upright, tried to stand, and was knocked back down by a second shot. Hidden, just returning to camp, fired blindly at a blurry shape on the trail and dove into the underbrush. By pure luck, his plasma shot hit a Shatser square in the head. Solyanka, filling his pot with water, had just noticed the riverboat Amphispina moored nearby. A surprise in itself, when he heard gunfire and realized something was very wrong. Soon, he spotted two figures on the trail, just 5 meters away. Combat camouflage had kept them hidden till the last moment. Solyanka hurled his pot at one and fired at the other, injuring him. Then something hit him hard on the side of the head, probably the butt of a weapon. There were clearly more enemies nearby, already spread throughout the area. 20 meters. Closer to the camp, Hidden was swearing and shooting wildly. Then he cried out and fell awkwardly. His leg was injured. A second later, an explosion cracked the air. A grenade had gone off. It took out another Shatser and wounded 2 more. The rescuers hadn't brought any grenades. This one must have been theirs. Maybe one of them fumbled it, or maybe it got hit by plasma. Either way, it exploded. The Shatsers wisely retreated. They weren't used to taking casualties on routine sweeps. They dragged Zban with them as they pulled out. Solyanka didn't waste the opportunity. He fired a few parting shots at them, reloaded, and crawled to Hidden. The man was pale, but conscious. "How bad is it?" Solyanka asked. "My leg," Hidden groaned, trying to prop himself up on an elbow. They took Zban. "We've got tourists to think about," Hid And we can't fight them off. Not with that many. Unless we all go in together. So, he helped Hidden up, slung an arm under his shoulder, and the two rescuers limped off through the jungle. Solyanka kept checking behind them. But strangely, no one followed. 15 minutes later, they reached the tourist camp. Mr. Little had come to during the short firefight. His head was pounding from the hangover. And worst of all, he didn't have a drop of water, just a few lingering sips of spirit in his flask. Barely thinking straight, he stumbled back to camp. The shooting hadn't even scared him. He saw Hidden firing from the bushes, saw strangers trying to tie up Solyanka, saw Hidden bravely driving them off with covering fire. He watched the invaders, barely distinguishable against the foliage, collect their dead and wounded, scoop up Span, and retreat quickly toward the hollow forest bunker.